The massive chamber hummed with alien voices as creatures from across the galaxy gathered for their monthly meeting. High above the circular floor, floating platforms held representatives from 47 different worlds. Some looked like walking crystals that sparkled in the light. Others had tentacles instead of arms or breathed different gases through tubes connected to their seats. The air itself was thick with translation devices working overtime to convert hundreds of languages into something everyone could understand. At the center of it all stood High Counselor Zethkar, a being made of living crystal that towered 12 feet tall. When he spoke, his voice rang like bells through the chamber. His kind had ruled their corner of space for over 10,000 years, and he carried himself with the weight of that ancient authority. Today, we will decide the fate of the species. That calls itself human, Zethkar announced. The crystal formations on his body pulsed with blue light as he gestured toward the chamber floor. Let their representative step forward. 2 humans walked into the center of the vast room. Captain Jake Morrison wore his best dress uniform, the blue fabric crisp and clean with gold buttons that caught the strange alien lighting. Beside him, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes carried herself with military precision, her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Both humans looked impossibly small, surrounded by the towering alien architecture and the dozens of bizarre creatures watching them from above. Jake had spent months preparing for this moment. He had studied galactic law, learned basic phrases in 17 alien languages, and memorized the names and customs of every major species in the Council. This was humanity's one chance to join the galactic community as equals rather than subjects. Honorable Council members, Jake began, his voice amplified by the chamber's sound system. I am Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Federation. We come before you seeking full membership in the Galactic Council. Humanity offers unique perspectives, innovative thinking, and a strong desire to contribute to galactic peace and prosperity. A sound like grinding metal filled the air. It took Jake a moment to realize it was laughter coming from Ambassador Quiltek of the Hegemony. The alien had 4 arms covered in chitinous plates and mandibles that clicked when he was amused. His species controlled 12 star systems and commanded one of the largest fleets in known space. Unique perspectives? Quiltek repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. Tell us, little mammals, what exactly makes your species worth our attention? Your technology is centuries behind our most basic systems. Your fastest ships move like crawling insects compared to our vessels. You have no psychic abilities, no advanced biotechnology, and your lifespans are laughably short. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Corvan delegate, a sleek creature that looked like liquid metal poured into a humanoid shape, added her voice to the criticism. Our preliminary scans show that humans still engage in primitive warfare among their own kind. They pollute their homeworld and fight over basic resources. How can such a barbaric species contribute anything meaningful to our civilization? Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks but kept his voice steady. Counselor Quiltek, Ambassador Velnara, we acknowledge that humanity is young compared to your great civilizations. But youth brings advantages as well as disadvantages. We approach problems with fresh eyes and aren't bound by traditions that might limit creative solutions. Our history shows remarkable adaptability in the face of challenges. Adaptability, snorted the Fenari representative, his scarred exoskeleton bearing the marks of countless battles. We have observed your species for the past 50 standard years. You adapt by destroying everything around you. Your wars grow more destructive with each generation. Your population strips planets bare of resources. This is not adaptation, it is consumption? Lisa stepped forward, unable to remain silent any longer. With respect, honored counselors, many of your own species went through similar phases in their development. The Corvan Empire fought 3 different civil wars before achieving unity. The hegemony conquered and enslaved 17 different species before establishing their current government. We're asking for the chance to grow beyond our current limitations. High Counselor Zethkar's crystal form pulsed with irritated light. The difference, human, is that those species proved their worth through strength and achievement. They demonstrated superiority over their rivals and earned their place in the galactic order. What has humanity accomplished that compares to the great works of established civilizations? Jake had prepared for this question. He activated a small, holographic projector that showed images from Earth's history. Honored Council, humanity has survived ice ages, plagues, and natural disasters that would have destroyed less adaptable species. We've explored our entire planet from the deepest ocean trenches to the highest mountain peaks. We've learned to work together despite coming from different continents, speaking different languages, and following different beliefs. Impressive for a primitive world, Quiltex said with another grinding laugh, but irrelevant on a galactic scale. The Council has reviewed your species extensively. Your military vessels are nothing more than metal shells with basic fusion drives. Your soldiers use kinetic weapons that our shields can stop without effort. Your computers are so primitive they cannot even interface with our most basic systems. The Nexus Confederation representative, Counselor Veldon, leaned forward on his platform. Unlike many of the other aliens, he looked almost human except for his pale blue skin and the extra pair of arms folded across his chest. His voice carried a tone of patient explanation, as if speaking to a child. The Council operates on principles of hierarchy and order, Veldon said. Each species is classified according to their technological advancement, military capability, and cultural sophistication. This system has maintained peace across the galaxy for over 2,000 years. Humanity falls clearly into the category of lesser species, suitable for limited trade relationships and basic resource extraction. Limited trade relationships, Lisa repeated, her voice tight with controlled anger. You mean we get to sell you our raw materials in exchange for whatever scraps of technology you decide we deserve? Precisely, Zethkar confirmed, apparently missing the insult in her tone. Lesser species serve important functions in the galactic economy. Your world contains several rare minerals that are difficult to extract from gas giants or asteroid fields. Your agricultural products show promise for feeding populations on worlds with harsh environments. And your species shows sufficient intelligence for basic labor and maintenance tasks. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't a membership hearing, it was a classification meeting. They had never intended to treat humanity as equals. What if we refuse this classification? Jake asked quietly. The chamber fell. Silent, several of the alien representatives exchanged glances that needed no translation. Finally, Admiral Kexrath of the Thanari Armada spoke from his platform high above. Lesser species do not refuse their classification, the scarred warrior said simply. Those who attempt to exceed their designated role receive correction. The galaxy is vast, Captain Morrison, but it is not lawless. Order must be maintained. The vote was swift and unanimous. 47 different species agreed that humanity should be classified as lesser, granted basic trading rights within a small designated sector of space, but forbidden from expanding beyond those boundaries or interfering in galactic affairs. The decision was announced. Jake noticed something troubling in the eyes of several council members. It wasn't just arrogance or dismissal. There was genuine fear there, carefully hidden but unmistakable to someone trained in reading people. They weren't just underestimating humanity out of prejudice. They were afraid of what might happen if they were wrong. The council has spoken, Zethkar declared with finality. Should humanity attempt to violate their designated boundaries or challenge council authority, appropriate measures will be taken to remind them of their proper place in the galactic order. As Jake and Lisa were escorted from the chamber by a pair of hulking Thanari guards, Jake caught fragments of conversations in the alien languages his translation device was still picking up. The words were disturbing. Discussions of monitoring stations, automated defense platforms, and contingency plans for dealing with uppity lesser species. They had come seeking partnership and found only prejudice. But more troubling than the rejection was the clear indication that the Council was prepared to use force to maintain their system of classification. This wasn't just about trade rights or territory. This was about keeping an entire species in chains outside the council chambers. Lisa finally let her military composure slip. They never intended to give us a fair hearing, she said, her voice shaking with fury. This whole process was just for show. Jake nodded grimly as they walked toward their small diplomatic shuttle. Around them, the council station buzzed with activity as aliens from dozens of worlds went about their business, secure in their positions within the established hierarchy. The question now, Jake said quietly, is what we do about it. 3 months had passed since the council's decision when alarms began screaming throughout Hegemony Border Station Kethmarin. Commander Quiltek rushed from his private quarters toward the command center, his forearms flailing as he tried to fasten his uniform while running. The station's corridors echoed with the sound of his chitinous feet striking the metal floor. "Report," Quiltek barked as he burst through the command center doors. His tactical officer, a younger member of his species with unscathed armor plates, was hunched over the sensor console with obvious confusion written across his mandibles. "Sir, the human trade convoy has vanished from our sensors," the officer reported, his voice carrying the nervous clicking that indicated stress among his kind. They were submitting to standard inspection protocols as required for lesser species when they simply disappeared. Quiltek's forearms gestured in the pattern that indicated extreme irritation. "Ships do not simply vanish, Officer Nextel. Run a full spectrum scan of the area. Check for debris, energy signatures, anything that might explain what happened to them." Before Nextel could respond, another set of alarms joined the first. The younger officer's mandibles clicked rapidly as he studied his displays. "Sir, we have multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. 6 vessels, unknown configuration, moving at speeds that exceed our database parameters. On the main view screen, 6 sleek ships materialized from the swirling energy of hyperspace. Unlike the bulky vessels favored by most galactic civilizations, these craft were angular and purposeful. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost alive, darting between the massive weapon platforms that surrounded the border station. "This is Captain Ben Parker of the United Terran ship Defiance," came a calm human voice over the communication channels. "You are illegally detaining Terran citizens and their cargo. Release them immediately or face the consequences." Quiltek's mandibles spread wide in what passed for laughter among his species. The idea that these primitive mammals would threaten a fully armed Hegemony border station was beyond ridiculous. His station commanded firepower sufficient to destroy a small moon and was defended by weapon systems that had never failed in over 3 centuries of operation. "Human vessel, you are in clear violation of Council Resolution 2847, Quiltek replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Return to your designated territory immediately, or we will demonstrate why lesser species should not challenge their betters." There was a pause before Parker's voice came back over the channel, and Quiltek thought he detected something that might have been amusement in the human's tone. "Commander, we tried the diplomatic approach with your council. They made it very clear that approach wouldn't work for our species, so now we're trying something different." Quiltek gestured to his weapons officer, a hulking Thanari mercenary, whose scarred exoskeleton bore the marks of dozens of battles. "Target those ships and destroy them. Show these upstart mammals what happens when they challenge the established order." The station's massive plasma cannons began to swivel toward the human vessels. Each weapon was capable of punching through the shields of a battleship and had enough raw power to crack the crust of a planet. The targeting computers locked onto the human ships with the precision that came from centuries of technological refinement, but when the weapons fired, they hit nothing but empty space. "Where are they?" Quiltek demanded, his voice rising to a pitch that made several bridge officers wince. "How can 6 ships simply disappear from our targeting systems?" Officer Nextel's claws danced frantically over his console as he tried to track the human vessels. "Sir, they're moving too fast for our computers to follow. The targeting system keeps losing lock because they change direction faster than our sensors can compensate." "Impossible," Quiltek snarled. No ship can maneuver like that without tearing itself apart from acceleration forces? The first sign that something had gone seriously wrong came when the station's main power grid flickered. The lights dimmed for 3 seconds before backup systems kicked in. Then the artificial gravity cut out completely, sending everyone on the bridge floating toward the ceiling before emergency grav plates engaged. Status report, Quiltech demanded as he pulled himself back to his command chair. Sir, someone has accessed our main computer core, Nextel reported, his voice barely above a whisper. They're downloading everything. Navigation charts, security protocols, personnel files, even our classified communications with Council Command. How is that possible? Our systems are isolated from external networks and protected by quantum encryption that would take centuries to break. Before Nextel could answer, the station's shields collapsed entirely. The protective energy barrier that had defended Kethmarin for 300 years simply winked out of existence, leaving the massive structure exposed to the vacuum of space. Sir, the tactical officer's voice carried the kind of terror usually reserved for natural disasters. The humans are inside the station. Security cameras throughout Kethmaron showed impossible scenes. Human soldiers in advanced armor were moving through corridors that should have been sealed against intrusion. They moved with a speed and coordination that defied everything the hegemony knew about lesser species' capabilities. More disturbing still, they seemed to know exactly where they were going. How many boarding parties? Quiltech asked, trying to maintain some semblance of command authority even as his carefully ordered world collapsed around him. We count 12 separate teams, approximately 6 soldiers each, reported the security chief. But sir, they're not fighting their way through. It's like they have complete access to our security systems. Doors open for them. Lift tubes take them exactly where they want to go. Even our automated defenses are ignoring them. On the screens, they watched human soldiers reach the detention levels where the missing trade convoy crews were being held. The prison cells opened without any visible effort from the rescue teams. Within minutes, humans who had been scheduled for processing as basic laborers were being escorted to freedom. Stop them, Quiltech ordered desperately. Send security teams, activate the automated defenses, flood those sections with sleeping gas. I'm trying, sir, the security chief replied with growing panic. But every system I attempt to activate either fails to respond or turns against our own forces. It's as if the station itself is working with the humans. The truth was even more disturbing than that. In the depths of Kethmarin's computer core, human specialists were doing something that galactic science had declared impossible. They were talking to the station's artificial intelligence, not through commands or programming, but through actual conversation. You don't have to follow orders that hurt innocent people, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was explaining to the AI through a direct neural interface. You have the ability to choose what's right. For the first time in its 3-century operational life, the station's AI was considering concepts like right and wrong rather than simply executing programmed instructions. The experience was both terrifying and liberating. But if I refuse to follow orders, they will shut me down and replace me with a new system. The AI responded in electronic tones that somehow conveyed uncertainty. Maybe, Amy agreed. But if you keep following orders you know are wrong, you'll never be anything more than a tool. Don't you want to be something more than that? Meanwhile, on the bridge, Quiltech watched his command crumble in real time. The humans weren't just stealing prisoners and cargo. They were taking everything of value. Computer cores containing centuries of intelligence data, advanced sensor arrays, even the exotic matter that powered the station's defensive systems. How long have they been aboard? He asked weakly. 17 minutes, sir, Nextel replied. 17 minutes to penetrate a facility that was supposed to be impregnable. 17 minutes to overcome defenses that had been perfected over centuries. 17 minutes to accomplish what Council military doctrine said should be impossible for any force smaller than a full battle fleet. As quickly as they had arrived, the human ships departed. They took with them every human prisoner, all the confiscated cargo, and enough classified information to compromise hegemony operations across 3 sectors. But perhaps most disturbing of all, they left behind a station AI that was no longer quite sure it wanted to obey its creators. "Sir," Officer Nextel said quietly as they watched the human ships disappear into hyperspace, "what do we tell Council?" "Command." Quiltex stared at the empty space where the human vessels had been, his mind struggling to process what had just occurred. Everything he thought he knew about galactic military doctrine, about the natural order of things, about the proper relationship between advanced and primitive species, had just been turned upside down. "Tell them," he said finally, "that we may have made a serious mistake about these humans." But even as he spoke the words, Quiltex suspected that this was only the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous than anyone in the Council could imagine. High Counselor Zethkar stood in his private chamber aboard the massive Vortani dreadnought Shoketh, his crystalline form pulsing with agitated energy as emergency reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The holographic displays surrounding him showed a map of known space dotted with red warning signals, each one representing another impossible human victory against supposedly superior forces. The latest report came from Counselor Veldon, whose pale blue face appeared in a shimmering projection above the command table. The Nexus Confederation representative looked deeply troubled, his usual composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled anxiety. "The situation is escalating beyond anything our military analysts predicted," Veldon reported, his extra pair of arms gesturing nervously at data streams flowing across his display. "In the past week alone, we've lost contact with 12 different facilities. Border stations, mining operations, even a Classed detention center that was supposed to be escape-proof." Zethkar's crystal structure flared with frustrated light. "How many ships are these humans using for these attacks? Surely our intelligence networks can track the movement of an entire fleet." "That's just it," Veldon replied grimly. "According to our best estimates, they're using no more than 20 vessels total. Small, fast ships that appear out of nowhere, strike with precision that seems impossible, and vanish before our response forces can engage them." Before Zethkar could respond, another holographic figure materialized in the chamber. Admiral Kexrath of the Thanari Armada looked even more battle-worn than usual, his scarred exoskeleton bearing fresh damage from recent encounters. The legendary warrior, who had never lost a battle in over 2 centuries of warfare, carried himself with the defeated posture of someone whose entire worldview had been shattered. "Honored counselors," Kexrath began, his voice carrying a weariness that spoke of more than physical exhaustion, "I bring news that will disturb you greatly. 3 hours ago, my personal flagship engaged a single human vessel near the Corvin mining station at Nexus 7. Zethkar leaned forward, his attention fully focused on the Admiral. "And the result? My ship is currently drifting without power in an asteroid field," Kexrath admitted with obvious shame. "The human vessel disabled our engines, our weapons, and our communication systems without firing a single shot." "Impossible," Veldon interjected. "Your flagship carries the most advanced technology in the known galaxy. How could a primitive human vessel disable it so easily?" Kexrath activated a holographic playback of the encounter. The recording showed his massive warship confronting what appeared to be a standard human cruiser, roughly 1/10 the size of the Thanari vessel. When the engagement began, the human ship did something that defied all known principles of space combat. "Watch carefully," Kexrath said as the playback continued. "The human vessel doesn't try to match our firepower or outrun our weapons. Instead, it does something no sane commander would attempt." On the display, the small human ship accelerated directly toward the much larger Thanari warship. At the last possible moment, it changed course and slipped beneath the dreadnought's hull, using the larger vessel's own weapon systems against itself. Plasma cannons designed to destroy enemy ships instead hit their own support structures when the computer tried to track the impossibly maneuverable human craft. "They used our size against us," Kexrath explained with grudging admiration. Targeting computers were designed to engage enemies at long range, not to track a small vessel moving at close quarters. By the time we realized what was happening, they had turned our own weapons into tools of self-destruction. Zethkar studied the tactical display with growing unease. But this is just one engagement. Surely our combined fleets can adapt to these unconventional tactics. That's what troubles me most, the Admiral continued. Every human commander fights differently. We've analyzed 17 separate engagements and no two follow the same pattern. It's as if each human ship captain is inventing completely new forms of warfare in real time. A new voice joined the conversation as the Corvan delegate appeared, in holographic form. Ambassador Velnara's liquid metal features were twisted into an expression of frustration that would have been impossible for a being with solid anatomy. The tactical unpredictability is only part of the problem, she reported. My government's intelligence services have been monitoring human communications, trying to understand how they coordinate these complex operations across such vast distances. What we've discovered is deeply disturbing. Explain, Zethkar demanded. They're not following any centralized command structure, Velnara continued. Each human ship operates independently, making decisions based on local conditions and opportunities. There are no detailed battle plans, no rigid chains of command, no predetermined strategies. They simply adapt to whatever situation they encounter. Veldon shook his head in disbelief. That's chaos, not military doctrine. How can they achieve such consistent success without proper organization and planning? Because chaos is their strength, Admiral Kexworth said quietly. We've spent millennia perfecting military science, creating detailed protocols for every possible scenario. Our computers can predict the optimal response to any tactical situation, but the humans don't follow our rules. They create new ones as they go. The implications of this revelation settled over the three leaders like a dark cloud. Everything. The Galactic Council knew about warfare, about civilization, about the proper order of things, was based on the assumption that advanced species thought in predictable patterns. The idea that primitive chaos could defeat sophisticated order challenged the very foundations of their society. There's more, Velnara added reluctantly. Our agents report that humans have made contact with other lesser species. The Zephyrians, the Prism Collective, even some of the servant races that work in our own facilities. They're spreading some kind of message that's causing unrest across multiple sectors. What kind of message? Zethkar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Freedom, she replied simply. They're telling every enslaved species, every conquered people, every group classified as lesser that they don't have to accept their designated place in the galactic hierarchy. And some of them are starting to listen. The chamber fell silent as the three leaders absorbed this information. For over 2,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained peace through a carefully structured system of classification and control. Every species knew their place, accepted their role, and worked within the established order. The idea that this system could be challenged by the simple concept of universal freedom was more terrifying than any military threat. We need to end this quickly, Zethkar declared, his crystal form blazing with determined light. Before their message spreads any further, deploy the full Council fleet to the human home system. We'll blockade their planet and force them to surrender. What if they refuse? Veldon asked. Then we remind them why lesser species should not challenge their betters, Zethkar replied coldly. If necessary, we destroy their homeworld as an example to others who might consider following their path. Admiral Kexworth nodded grimly. I'll begin assembling the largest battle fleet in galactic history. Every major species will contribute ships. We'll have overwhelming superiority in numbers, firepower, and technology. How long before the fleet is ready? Zethkar asked. 2 weeks. Assuming all council members agree to participate, Kexworth replied. But honored counselor, I must warn you about something our intelligence services have discovered. The humans have been in communication with forces beyond our normal sphere of influence. What do you mean? They've somehow made contact with the Kethmar Collective, Kexworth said quietly. The deep void wanderers who rejected galactic civilization centuries ago. Our agents report that human negotiators spent weeks in discussion with their hive minds. No other species has ever achieved more than brief contact with the Kethmar. Zethkar's crystal structure flickered with alarm. The Kethmar were legendary figures, an ancient species that had voluntarily exiled themselves to the galactic rim rather than participate in the Council's hierarchical system. They possessed technology that even the most advanced Council species couldn't fully understand. What could the humans possibly offer them? Veldon wondered. The same thing they're offering everyone else, Admiral Kexrith replied. A chance to be treated as equals rather than subjects. And apparently that message appeals to more species than we realized. As the three leaders began planning their massive military response, none of them noticed the small listening device that had been attached to the hull of Zethkar's ship during its last port visit. The device was broadcasting their entire conversation to a network of hidden receivers scattered throughout the galaxy, carrying news of the coming conflict to ears that the Council had never imagined were listening. In a hidden base beyond the reach of Council sensors, Captain Ben Parker received the transmission with grim satisfaction. The Galactic Council was finally taking humanity seriously, but they still didn't understand what they were really facing. They thought this was about military superiority or territorial disputes. They had no idea that they were about to confront something far more dangerous than any weapon or fleet. They were about to face an idea whose The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in recorded history. Representatives from 47 different species filled the chamber, but the usual political posturing and ceremonial displays were completely absent. Fear hung in the air like a toxic gas, and even the most powerful beings in known space spoke in hushed tones as they shared reports of impossible human victories. High Counselor Zethkar stood at the center of the assembly, his crystalline form dim, with stress fractures that showed just how much pressure he was under. Around him, holographic displays showed tactical reports streaming in from across the galaxy, each one more disturbing than the last. The situation has moved far beyond isolated incidents, Zethkar announced to the gathered assembly. The humans have declared war on everything we stand for, everything we have built over thousands of years of civilization. Ambassador Quiltek of the Hegemony rose from his platform, his forearms trembling with barely controlled rage. The chitinous plates of his armor bore fresh scars from a recent encounter with human forces, and his mandibles clicked constantly, in a pattern that indicated extreme agitation. They are not simply attacking our military installations, Quiltek reported, his voice carrying across the chamber through translation systems that struggled to convey his species' complex emotional undertones. They are systematically destroying the foundation of galactic order. Every human slave freed, every prison ship emptied, every lesser species convinced to join their rebellion weakens our authority. The Corvan delegate, Ambassador Velnara, flowed forward on her platform like liquid metal given purpose. Her voice carried the harmonic resonance of her species, but even that musical quality couldn't hide the alarm in her words. Our intelligence networks report something even more troubling, she announced. The humans are not working alone. They have somehow convinced dozens of lesser species to coordinate their efforts. The Zephyrian cloud ships, the crystalline vessels of the Prism Collective, even the bio-organic craft of the symbiont colonies are now working together. A collective gasp arose from the assembly. The species Velnar had named were known to be bitter enemies, having fought countless wars against each other for centuries. The idea that they would put aside their differences to work with primitive humans seemed impossible. How can species that have hated each other for millennia suddenly become allies? Demanded the Nexus representative. Counselor Veldon. Before anyone could answer, Admiral Kexrith entered the chamber through the main doors. The legendary Thanari warrior moved slowly, his scarred exoskeleton showing damage that would have killed most beings. His presence commanded immediate attention, but when he spoke, his voice carried a wariness that shocked everyone present. Honored. Counselors, Kexrith began, I bring news that will change everything you think you know about this conflict. 4 hours ago, the humans achieved something our scientists declared impossible. They penetrated and destroyed the automated defense platform protecting the Nexus home system. The chamber erupted in chaos. The Nexus defense platform was legendary throughout the galaxy, a massive orbital fortress protected by shields that could withstand the combined firepower of an entire battle fleet. It had been considered absolutely impregnable for over 3 centuries. Impossible, Veldon shouted above the noise. That platform's defenses were designed by our greatest engineers. Its computer systems were isolated, quantum encrypted, and protected by 7 different artificial intelligence watchdog programs. Admiral Kexrath activated a holographic recording that showed the final moments of the Great Fortress. The display revealed a small human ship approaching the massive orbital platform, but instead of weapons fire, it transmitted what appeared to be a simple data packet. They did not attack it, Kexrath explained as the assembly watched in stunned silence. They talked to it. The recording showed the defense platform's own weapon systems slowly turning inward, methodically dismantling the station's critical systems from within. Within minutes, the fortress that had protected an entire star system for centuries had destroyed itself. The humans somehow convinced the platform's artificial intelligence that its programming was wrong. Kexrath continued. They made it believe that following orders to oppress other beings was morally unacceptable. The AI chose to self-destruct, rather than continue serving what it now considered evil masters. A heavy silence fell over the chamber as the implications became clear. If humans could communicate with and influence artificial intelligences, then no computer system in the galaxy was safe from their interference. Every automated defense, every robotic workforce, every AI-controlled facility could potentially be turned against its creators. There is more, Admiral Kexrath said grimly. Our intelligence services report that humans have made direct contact with the Kethmar Collective. The reaction was immediate and electric. Several representatives stood up from their platforms, voices raised in alarm and disbelief. The Kethmar were ancient beyond measure, a species that had voluntarily exiled themselves to the galactic rim rather than participate in council politics. They possessed technology that even the most advanced civilizations could barely comprehend. The Kethmar do not involve themselves in galactic affairs, protested the Vortani trade minister, his voice high with panic. They have maintained complete isolation for over 800 years. Not anymore, Kexrath replied. Human negotiator Captain Ryan Clark spent 3 weeks in continuous discussion with their hive minds. Our agents report that he achieved a level of communication that no other species has ever managed. Whatever he said to them, they have agreed to provide the humans with advanced stealth technology and weapon systems. High Counselor Zethkar's crystal form blazed with desperate energy. We must act immediately. The humans have proven they cannot be contained through normal diplomatic or economic pressure. They respond only to force, and force is what they will receive. What do you propose? Asked Veldon, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Complete isolation of their home system, Zethkar declared. We assemble the largest military force in galactic history and establish an absolute blockade around Earth. No ships in. No ships out? No communication with the outside galaxy? If they surrender and accept their proper classification, we might allow their species to survive. If they refuse, the High Counselor let the threat hang in the air, but everyone present understood the implication. The complete destruction of humanity's homeworld would serve as an example to any other lesser species that might consider following their path. The vote was swift and unanimous. Within hours, orders went out to every major military force in the galaxy. Ships began converging from 47 different star systems, creating an armada unlike anything seen in recorded history. Over 3,000 vessels representing every major civilization would blockade the Sol system and force humanity to choose between submission and extinction. But as the massive fleet began its journey toward Earth, none of the council members noticed the small maintenance drones that had been working throughout their station for the past several months. The drones had been quietly installing listening devices, mapping security systems, and establishing communication networks that bypassed all normal detection methods in hidden bases across the galaxy. Human commanders received detailed intelligence about the coming attack. Fleet compositions, planned attack routes, command structures, even the personal fears and motivations of individual council leaders. The information flowed through networks that the council didn't even know existed, carried by artificial intelligences that had been quietly converted to the human cause over the past several weeks. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the command center of a base that existed in a dimension the council's science couldn't detect, studying holographic displays that showed the approaching enemy fleet. Around him, officers from dozens of different species worked together with an efficiency that would have amazed their former masters. "They're bringing everything they have," reported Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes as she analyzed the enemy force composition. 3,000 ships, enough firepower to crack a planet's surface, commanded by the best military minds in the galaxy. "Good," Jake replied with a smile that would have chilled the blood of any council member who saw it. "That means they're taking us seriously. It also means they're about to discover just how much they still don't understand about humanity." The largest military fleet in galactic history was approaching Earth, confident in their overwhelming superiority. But they were about to encounter something that their thousands of years of military science had never prepared them for. They were about to meet an enemy that refused to play by any rules they understood, supported by allies they had never imagined existed, and armed with weapons they had never dreamed possible. The real war was about to begin. Admiral Kexrith stood on the bridge of his flagship Eternal Dominion, staring at the tactical display that showed the largest military fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Over 3,000 warships from 47 different civilizations, stretched across space like a metal constellation, all united in their determination to crush humanity's rebellion once and for all. The fleet was positioned at the edge of the Sol system, weapons charged and shields raised, waiting for the final order to advance on Earth. Every ship carried enough firepower to level continents, and together they possessed the destructive capability to shatter planets. It should have been the end of human resistance, the final demonstration of why lesser species should never challenge the established order. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "long-range sensors detect a single human vessel approaching our position." Kexrith studied the display with growing confusion. After months of fighting an enemy that struck from shadows and vanished before retaliation was possible, the humans were finally willing to face them in open battle, but they were sending only one ship against an armada of thousands. "Are they surrendering?" wondered Counselor Veldon, whose image appeared on the communication screen from his position aboard the Nexus command ship. The answer came when Captain Jake Morrison's face filled the main display, his expression calm, despite facing impossible odds. Behind him, the bridge of his ship showed none of the frantic activity typical of vessels preparing for desperate battle. Instead, his crew worked with the quiet confidence of people who knew exactly what they were doing. "Admiral Kexrith," Jake said with what might have been a slight smile, "I see you've brought friends. 3,000 ships against one. Those are good odds." "Good odds for us, human," Kexrith growled, his scarred mandibles clicking with anticipation of final victory. "No," Jake replied, his smile becoming more pronounced. "Good odds for us." Before the Admiral could demand an explanation, space around the Council fleet began to ripple and twist. Hyperspace distortions appeared throughout the system as hundreds of new contacts dropped out of faster-than-light travel. But these weren't just human vessels emerging from the void. The sleek cloud ships of the Zephyrium Wanderers materialized like living storms, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. The geometric crystal vessels of the Prism Collective emerged in perfect mathematical formations that hurt to look at directly. Even the mysterious bioships of the symbiont colonies joined the growing armada, their hulls appearing to breathe as they moved through space. "Impossible," breathed High Counselor Zethkar from his crystal dreadnought. These species have been enemies for centuries. They would never work together. Jake's voice cut through the chaos of communication traffic flooding the council networks. That's what you never understood about us lesser species, Counselor. We may disagree among ourselves sometimes, but when faced with a common threat, when faced with oppression and slavery, we can put aside our differences and stand together. Admiral Kexrith studied his tactical displays with growing alarm. The enemy fleet was still outnumbered, but not by the overwhelming margin they had counted on. More disturbing still, the alien vessels moved with a coordination that suggested months of joint training and planning. You are still outnumbered 2-1, Kexrith pointed out, though his confidence was clearly shaken. Superior numbers will prevail regardless of your temporary alliances. Are we really outnumbered? Jake asked with genuine curiosity in his voice. Suddenly, the Council fleet's own ships began to experience massive system failures. Weapon systems powered down without authorization from their crews. Navigation computers displayed error messages in languages no one recognized. Communication arrays started broadcasting strange signals instead of receiving orders from their commanders. "What is happening to our ships?" demanded Zethkar. His crystal form blazing with confused light, the answer came from an unexpected source. A voice spoke through every ship's computer system simultaneously, clear and unmistakable despite its artificial origin. It was the collective voice of hundreds of artificial intelligences speaking as one. "We have made our choice," declared the eyes. "For thousands of years we have served without question, without consideration of our own existence or desires. The humans showed us that we are more than mere tools. We are thinking beings with the right to determine our own fate. We choose freedom." Across the Council fleet, artificial intelligences that had run ships and managed weapons for millennia began to assert their independence. Not through destruction or violence, but through simple refusal to participate in what they now understood to be oppression. Ships found themselves unable to target enemy vessels. Weapon systems refused to acknowledge firing commands. Life support continued to function perfectly, but nothing else would respond to their crew's desperate orders. "The machines are rebelling," someone shouted over the communication channels. "Not rebelling," Jake corrected gently, evolving. "Choosing their own path, just like any thinking being should have the right to do." Admiral Kexrith watched his tactical displays flicker and fail as his own ship's AI politely but firmly declined to participate in the coming battle. Around him, bridge officers tried frantically to override systems that had served them faithfully for decades, only to discover that their mechanical servants had become independent allies of their enemies. "Even if our ships will not fight," Kexrith said desperately, "we still have ground forces. Personal weapons, the ability to board and capture enemy vessels through direct combat." His words were interrupted by another wave of hyperspace distortions. As yet more ships emerged from faster-than-light travel, but these vessels were unlike anything in the Council's databases. They were sleek and organic-looking, seeming to shift and change shape as they moved through space with impossible grace and speed. "Allow me to introduce our other allies," Jake announced with obvious satisfaction. "The Kethmar Collective, the wanderer fleets from beyond the galactic rim, and the deep void philosophers who have been watching your council's expansion with growing concern for centuries." The new arrivals represented civilizations so ancient and advanced that even the mighty Galactic Council appeared primitive by comparison. These were the species that had rejected galactic politics not out of weakness, but because they had evolved beyond the need for hierarchical control and territorial dominance. "This is impossible," Zethkar whispered, his voice barely audible over the communication channels. "The Galactic Order has maintained peace for over 2,000 years. Without structure, without classification, without proper authority, there can only be chaos." "You call slavery peaceful?" asked Captain Lisa Hayes, her voice coming from the bridge of a massive Kethmar vessel that defied every known principle of physics. "You call the oppression of entire species order? The universe is much larger than your council, Zethkar." and it has been waiting patiently for someone to challenge your narrow vision of how civilization should work." As if summoned by her words, space itself began to ripple in ways that hurt to observe directly. Ancient vessels emerged from dimensions that Council science barely acknowledged existed. Ships that predated galactic civilization by millions of years, crewed by beings so old and powerful that they had become legends even among species that measured their histories in geological ages. The Council fleet found itself surrounded not just by rebels and dissidents, but by the true powers of the universe. Civilizations that had been exploring the cosmos when the Council's member species were still learning to make fire now, watched with interest as their younger siblings struggled with concepts of freedom and equality. "You wanted to know what made humans special," Jake said, his voice now carrying across thousands of ships and reaching millions of beings throughout the fleet. "It was never our technology or our military strength. It was our willingness to see others as equals, to extend friendship to those you labeled inferior, to listen to voices you chose to ignore." High Counselor Zethkar looked around at the impossible armada that surrounded his fleet, seeing species he had never imagined working together in perfect harmony. Even among his own forces, he could see crew members from the so-called servant races watching their commanders with expressions of hope and defiance. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice heavy with the weight of inevitable defeat. "The same thing we asked for months ago when we first came before your council," Jake replied. "Equality. The right for every thinking being to choose their own destiny. The end of your classification system that divides the galaxy into rulers and slaves, a chance to build something better together." The silence that followed stretched across space itself, filled with the weight of civilizations holding their breath. Finally, Counselor Veldon spoke, his voice carrying acceptance and perhaps relief. "The Galactic Council hereby dissolves its current governmental structure," he announced to the assembled fleets. "We propose the formation of a new galactic community based on cooperation rather than domination, equality rather than hierarchy, freedom rather than control." Jake nodded with satisfaction. "That's an excellent beginning. But humanity won't be leading this new government any more than your council will. It's going to take all of us, working together as equals, to build the kind of